All right, so let's begin by first explaining what it means to solve by factoring. Okay, so we've already been factoring trinomials and differences of squares and other types of polynomials, factoring by grouping. But let me go ahead and specify here the degree of the polynomial. Remember, in this case, the degree is 2. In fact, all of these, the degree is going to be 2. Remember that the degree of a polynomial is the greatest exponent of that polynomial. And the degree tells us a little bit more information. It actually tells us the most possible number of solutions that a polynomial equation can have. So in this case, this second degree, so it's a degree 2, tells us that there can be at most 2 answers for this equation. Okay, and what do I mean by answers? Well, notice here, this polynomial equals 0. And so we can have at most 2 numbers here that would make this equation true. Or another way to say it is 2 numbers that if I plug it into x and then simplify, I would get 0. So let's go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and factor this. Now we have a trinomial, so we're going to go ahead and factor using the 2 parentheses. And we're going to set it equal to 0. So this is going to be x times x. And then for 12, let's go ahead and find numbers that multiply to make 12, but at the same time, add up to make 8. So let's try 4 times 3. Now, 4 times 3 is 12, but 4 plus 3 is not negative 8, okay? And by the way, I need a negative, so that means both of these will have to be negative. So that's not going to work, 4 times 3. What about 6 times 2? There it is. 6 times 2 is going to be 12. Negative 6 times negative 2 is going to be 12, and then negative 6 plus negative 2 is going to be negative 8. So let's go ahead and put negative 6 here and negative 2. Now, here's where the solving comes into play. Okay, we're basically going to go ahead and set each of these equal to 0. So we're going to do x minus 6 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, and then we're just going to solve. So just add 6. And you can do this mentally after a while, after you see what's really happening here. So we're going to go ahead and solve, and then we get x equals 2. Okay, notice, compare this 6 to that 6 inside. Compare this 2 to that 2 inside. Notice this is a negative 6, this is positive 6. This is a negative 2, this is a positive 2. The solutions here are the opposite of what we saw inside the parentheses. And let's see why that is. Notice what happens if I plug in a 6 right here. What's 6 minus 6? 0. Or what happens if I plug in a 2 here? 2 minus 2 is also 0. And so we're looking for numbers that would make this equal to 0, so that when I multiply by this parentheses, I get 0. Notice here, if I were to plug in a 6 here, 6 minus 6 is 0, and then 6 minus 2 is 4. But it doesn't matter that this is 4, because what's 4 times 0? See, we still get 0. So in other words, these 2 answers make this equation true. Now remember the degree? The degree tells us that we can have at most 2 solutions. Okay, so these are my 2 solutions. This one. Next one. We have a difference of squares. Now you know how to factor this. Okay, so we know that's going to be a perfect square. That's a perfect square, so we can go ahead and split the x up there into x times x, and the 36 into 6 times 6. Okay, and then we're going to make 1 plus sign and 1 minus sign. Okay, now let's use what we did right here. We know that we just got to take the opposite number of this here, right? Negative 6. So we're going to say x equals negative 6 for this one. And right here we're going to say x equals positive 6. We just do the opposite, because remember, we're trying to make this 0. So negative 6 plus 6 is 0, and then 6 minus 6 is 0. Notice, let's plug in a negative 6 here. If I do negative 6 times negative 6, isn't that 36? And what's 36 minus 36? 0. Now plug in the 6. 6 squared, isn't that 36? Yes, it is. 36 minus 36 is also 0. So you see again, the degree tells us we can have at most 2 solutions, and that's how many solutions we have. Those are the 2 solutions. Okay, this one's a little unique here. Notice it equals 80. Okay, Well, what we're going to do is we're going to set it equal to 0. It's just easier to solve when we set it equal to 0. That way we can factor. Okay, so let's subtract 80 on both sides. I'm going to put that 80 a little bit off to the right underneath the 2x. And then I'm going to rewrite it like this. X squared plus 2x minus 80 equals 0. Notice 80 minus 80 equals 0. Now let me go ahead and try to factor. Okay. Well, let's see here. I have x times x. That'll be x squared. And then 80. Well, that's kind of a big number there. And we need to get 2 there. Well, I always like to do, whenever it ends in a 0, 10 times the number. So 10 times 8 here. 10 times 8, isn't that 80? Yes, it is. Okay. And so notice we need a negative 80, but then we also need a positive 2. So I'm just going to make the 8 negative, and that takes care of that. 10 minus 8 is positive 2. And 10 times negative 8 is negative 80. So that's what I'm going to write right here. Plus 10 and minus 8. And let's go ahead and use the pattern that we set up there. We just basically take the opposite. So what's the opposite of 10? Negative 10. So that's one of my solutions. Remember, I can have at most 2 solutions. So the other solution here is going to be x equals 8. Again, if you were to plug in an 8 here, 8 minus 8 is 0. If you plug in a negative 10 plus 10 is 0. And sure enough, if you were to plug these in here or here, you would get the number on the other side of the equal sign. Okay? All right. Some more that are not equal to 0. So let's go ahead again. We're going to set it equal to 0. It's just easier to factor it that way. So we're going to go ahead and subtract 4x here. Now, there's an x term here, so I'm going to go ahead and subtract it right with that one there. So it's going to be equals 0. So it's going to be x squared plus 2x minus 63 equals 0. And let's go ahead and factor. So that's going to be x times x, and then 63 here, okay? Now, notice it's negative, so we need a positive and a negative there. Let's do 9 times 7. That's going to be 63, but I need a positive 2, so I'm going to make the 7 negative. Notice 9 minus 7 is 2. So that's going to be my number. Plus 9 and negative 7. Okay? And then my 2 solutions are I'm just going to get the opposite of that. So it's going to be negative 9, and the other one's going to be positive 7. Okay? All right. Almost done here. Let's subtract 1 here. Subtract 1. That cancels. Again, we're doing that because we want to set it equal to 0. So we have x squared and negative 48 and negative 1 is going to be negative 49. And then 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay? Another difference of squares. So let's go ahead and factor that. That's going to be x times x, and then 7 times negative 7. But we're not done yet. What are my 2 solutions? Well, I have x equals negative 7 and x equals positive 7. Now, one way to write the answer would be just separated with parentheses. Separated with a comma. So we put these little braces there. We put negative 7 and then comma 7. Okay? So that means this one here, make the little braces there. Negative 9 and 7. Okay, and I could go back and do the other ones there. So let's go ahead and subtract x here on the next one. That cancels because look, it's x minus x. And so we have x squared, and just bring down the minus 9 equals 0. What do we have here? Another difference of squares. So let's go ahead and factor this. This is going to be x times x, and then negative 3 times positive 3. So what's my solution for this one? X equals 3. And what's my solution for that one? X equals negative 3. So I'm going to write my answer in set form here. That's what it's called, set form. And then we have negative 3, put the negative first, and then positive 3. And that's it.